Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. All right, excellent. Again, thank you all for joining me this afternoon. For Prioritize and Execute, we're going to be talking about creating some industry-specific focus for risk-based vulnerability management. Before we jump into that, just want to do a quick intro about myself. So my name is Nate Foster. I've been a threat intelligence consultant at Recorded Future for the last 3 years. Currently, I live in the Chicago area with my wife and daughter, and in my free time, I enjoy woodworking and cooking. Prior to coming to Recorded Future, I worked as a network engineer for a very large medical device manufacturer, and a huge part of my role was keeping our routers, switches, firewalls, so on and so forth, up to date with the latest and greatest patches, often between the hours of midnight and 3 a.m. So understanding the context and the why behind every vulnerability is actually crucial to the infrastructure is something that I take pretty seriously, and I'm excited to talk to you guys about in a little bit more depth today. I'm going to be pausing every few slides just to check in on any questions, but please feel free to throw them up in the chat, and we will do our best to get to as many of them as possible with the time we have today. All right, so just kicking things off. Vulnerability management, it's not glamorous, but it is one of the best ways that we can be proactive in securing our organizations. However, the problem lies just in the sheer volume of vulnerabilities that come to light each year. In fact, Gartner estimates that over the past decade, an average of 8,000 new vulnerabilities were discovered on an annual basis. So there is good news, however. Of that, only a small percentage are ever actually exploited in the wild, and even fewer still pose any level of risk to your organization. But how do we determine what is crucial and what can be ignored? So in this presentation, we're going to be walking through strategies to efficiently sort through those mountains of data and determine which vulnerabilities pose actual risk to your organization, create targeted returns to better highlight industry-specific vulnerability risk, and demonstrate a data-driven approach to better understand the tactics, techniques, and procedures of would-be attackers to enable teams to proactively take steps within their security programs. So the goal here is to go beyond mere theory and bring this and make this as real world applicable as possible. In my experience, news articles generate the most ad hoc requests from clients, which of course makes sense because there's a lot more people out there reading the Wall Street Journal as opposed to patch reports from Microsoft as part of their morning routine. So I'm going to use this article that the Fed published earlier this year as an example. But I do want to say that just because we are kind of focusing a little bit on the financial services industry, this is going to be applicable to everyone. So please don't feel the need to tune out if this isn't your industry vertical. All right. So taking a look at this article, specifically their conclusions. More research is needed to understand the transmission channels and mitigants for cyber vulnerabilities, and a significant data gap impedes assessing and mitigating those cyber vulnerabilities, both within the financial system and at service providers. And the title of this article is Implications of Cyber Risk for Financial Stability. All right, so let's take a look at some of the strategies that we can use to fill in these gaps. All right, so the first step in this process is to pose some targeted questions to help us drive our focus as well as our collection plan. So first on is, which CVEs are we actually susceptible to? Of course, this is fairly obvious since the title of the article that we use as our example is, calling out CVEs specifically. Creating an efficient way to sort through and prioritize this data is of course key to our end goal today. But we also want to look at what additional context we can gather around these CVEs to help fill in any of those gaps in visibility within our program. So the next question we can ask ourselves is, how are these CVEs leveraged? So, how are these vulnerabilities being used in attacks today? What can we, most likely expect to see, in the wild created from these CVEs? And lastly, who is using this malware? So similar to the previous question, there's a ton of threat actors out there, but how many of them are posing real risk with their existing attacks and campaigns to our organization? Okay. So circling back to those figures I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, just to help us establish our baseline. So we're starting off with approximately 8,000 CVEs reported on average on an annual basis. Only a small number of those are exploited in the wild. In fact, most times it's as small as 5% or 400 CVEs. But should you care about all 400? Should you care about all 8,000? Like, how do you determine what is worthy of your time, and how can you take steps to quickly and efficiently make that determination? And that is where threat intelligence comes into play. All right, so just a real quick breakdown of what we're looking at here. This is our security intelligence graph, which is essentially a pictographic representation of how Recorded Future does what it does. So, we're scraping tens of millions of sources across the deep, dark, and open web multiple times a day. All right, all of that data is then analyzed in real time by our natural language processing system. And it is then indexed and correlated and then presented to our end users as usable intelligence. One of the really powerful components that we can see here on the slide is our ontologies. Essentially, think of these as buckets where we place all of the information about a specific entity within it and link it together, and which ensures a high fidelity return in all of our data sets. One great example of this would be our threat actor names. So you think of APT28, also known as Fancy Bear, and also is lumped into that Russian state-sponsored threat actor group. So if you were to search for any one of those key terms, you would pull back context and data that encompasses all three of them together. So just another way to help analysts paint that larger picture when they're doing their investigations. So we have all of this index data, but how does this help us prioritize anything? So this is where the risk scores you see mentioned under the analytics section comes into play. Okay, so this is one of our threat landscapes. This enables us to monitor in real time, which CVEs are trending and where they are in their path to weaponization. I would like to draw your attention to these numbers that you see here off to the right of each entity. These are our risk scores. So we work on a scale of 0 to 99. Of course, 99 is the most critical. And one of the things that we at Recorded Future really pride ourselves on is the transparency in our data. So at whenever possible, we try to give you exactly where this came from and the why behind our score. And we do this through risk rules. So as you can see here, we're basing this 99 off of the 12 out of 21 total risk rules that we have, which are proprietary to us, and the way we kind of calculate that risk. But we also provide a breakdown of each and every one of those rules. So for example, with this CVE here, the reason we're looking at such a critical score is it's being exploited in the wild by active ransomware, as well as having a high NIST severity. Okay. And this will come into play in the next few slides. But before we move forward, just wanted to briefly pause to see if there was any questions. I can't really see the chat right now since I'm presenting, but were there any questions that we wanted to address real quick?
Yeah, a few of them. So Rajiv asked, what is the average time it takes folks to assess the impact of a CVE?
That's the impact of a CVE. Yeah, so I mean, that's usually, pretty quick. Again, using the scores and the risk rules themselves, it provides like that roll up of, what's going on, how it's linked together with, various other IOCs and, the mitigations, assessments and advisories that also go along with it. So, and we'll kind of walk through some of that here in the next couple slides as well.
And one last question, Chase Dodson asked, do you also consider the difficulty of the exploit?
The difficulty of the exploit. Not sure what,
okay.
Can you provide some additional context on that one? Or maybe we can circle back.
Yeah, we'll circle back.
Okay, sure thing. All right, excellent. All right, so let's jump into some of those targeted questions. Which CVEs are we actually susceptible to? So it's probably a safe assumption that most of your organizations keep a good record of the technology that makes up their key infrastructure. Even if it's not as something as official as like a true CMDB, I'm sure there's a running list of the crown jewels, if you will, of technology that could that would present a catastrophic situation if they were ever exploited. So what we do is we can take that list and run it up against key data points within the recorded future platform. In this case, we're going up against cyber exploits, cyber attacks, and our proprietary network and malware analysis over the last 90 days. Okay, and we are presented with a total of 44 CVEs, which is already a much more manageable list for our team to investigate, if you recall back to our baseline a few slides ago. However, leveraging the power of those risk scores that we discussed on the previous slide, we can condense that list even further by only focusing on the CVEs that have a high critical value. So of that 44, we have now 7 CVEs that are deemed critical that our teams can then investigate and either patch or confirm that there are already controls in place to address them. Another important thing to call out here is what we're looking at. All of this can be automated. So an updated list can be provided to teams on a weekly, daily, or even every 4 to 8 hour cadence. Just depends on their preference for ingesting that type of information. But the key thing is all of this can be provided, or the list can be constantly updated to ensure that you're getting the latest and greatest info for your infrastructure. Another thing I just wanted to point out here is all this sample data is coming from a demo environment of mine that is monitoring for right around 500 unique technology entities. Just to give you an understanding of the sample size that this represents and how it could correlate to your own infrastructures. All right, so we're off to a good start, but is there more actionable data we can pull just using the CVE information? All right, so we're jumping into our next targeted question, which is an understanding of how these CVEs are leveraged. So using that custom list, that list of 44, we take that and run that back through the Recorded Futures platform using its billions of data points to better understand which malware variants are currently using those CVEs in their current attacks out in the wild. All right, so, and that's what we see here. As interesting as this is, at the end of the day, if it's not actionable, it's not exactly super valuable either. So we want to take this to the next level and run a few additional queries to understand some critical context and some essential elements of information around each malware variant so that you can apply that back into your own security programs to better understand this malware and then get ahead of any of these potential attacks. So in this case, just for demo purposes, we're pulling out any of the known C2s, delivery methods, as well as associated hash values for each and every one of these malware variants. Okay. So moving on to our third targeted question, who is using this malware? So similar to the approach we took with understanding which malware we should focus on, we take that list of CVEs, run it back through the system, through all that index data, and understand which threat actors are most likely going to be using this malware in their attacks or campaigns. It's also similar to that malware investigation. We want to understand, what additional actionable data is out there for each of these actors. And so that brings us to these hunting packages, TTPs, and MITRE codes. So understanding the behavior of these threat actors is huge. So from what we've seen in the past, it's rare for most threat actors to deviate from their TTPs. Your IOCs and their attacks are constantly changing, and that's where the power of that automation that I mentioned a few slides ago comes in. But for the behaviors or TTPs, once we have a really good understanding of what each threat actor is likely to do, we're in an excellent position to start being more proactive as opposed to reactive in our approach to mitigations. So now that being said, we do still have some automated workflows available, chief among them being these hunting packages. And these are proprietary packages that we put together via Sigma or Yara roles that our end users can drop into their system. There's any of their vulnerability scanners, SIM, SOAR, what have you, to run in the background and let you know as the end user if there's any sort of correlating behavioral data that is showing up in your logs that has a tie back to any one of these threat actor groups that we think is providing or is most likely to pose risk to the organization itself.
Morali asks, how often does the threat intelligence data get updated?
Yeah, that's a great question. It depends on the source, but pretty much on a everything within a 24-hour cycle gets updated. So some of the IOCs get updated on a every 5-minute basis, some every 4 hours, some every 8. But I can confidently say that within a 24-hour cycle, everything is fully refreshed and rescraped. All right, so putting it all together. So we started off this exercise by looking to understand how to assess and mitigate those cyber vulnerabilities. So we created those 3 targeted questions to help drive our path and our collection plan. Next, we developed those supporting questions to help us build additional context around the actionability of each item. And we also used the information gathered to help answer any of our subsequent questions. So this is, of course, just a sample for demo purposes, but in a nutshell, what we're trying to do here overall is develop a set of those targeted questions that not only create a framework to help drive your collection plan, it also makes it very simple to identify if there's any gaps that may exist in your program. Pull metrics to understand what is generating the most work for our teams, and also determine the ROI that's being provided by the individual tools and the collection plan holistically. This is, we term this as priority intelligence requirements or PIRs, and it's a work exercise that we try to implement with every one of our clients at Recorded Future, just because the return on that value has been so positive for so many. So this is a direct example of things we try to do with each and every one of our clients. All right, and just to kind of bring things back into the financial services sector, since we started off with an article from the Fed, let's take a look at an example of what that could look like for a financial services industry client. So let's say threats to the money transfer system. So we start off with SWIFT, BankNet, and Fedwire as some of our examples. Using SWIFT, expanding on SWIFT rather, we want to understand what malware and what threat actors are posing the most risk to that specific transfer system. And then we jump back into those essential elements of information where we would then pull out the associated C2s, delivery methods, hashes, so on and so forth. But this just creates a much more complete picture and makes it a lot more manageable to understand where the nuances of the collection plan comes into play. So with that, I'd like to just open it up to questions if we have any more.
Yeah, Morali also asked, what score is given to APTs where there is no mitigation available?
So if there's no mitigation available for the APTs, what we'll generally do is just provide as much context as possible. So we have our Finnish intelligence team, which is our team of subject matter expert analysts, many of whom had a long career at three-letter agencies before they came over to Recorded Future, and write very in-depth, valuable reports around these threat actors and their behaviors and their current campaigns, and we use the that information to correlate and draw additional information and context around what they're up to, and exactly what risk they may pose to either different industries, different technologies, vulnerabilities, et cetera.
Well, all right. Nate, this is really great. I really want to thank you for your time today. Enjoyed your presentation, and I appreciate everybody who's been adding to the conversation.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.